A funny thing is happening in our society with expertise. On one hand, we've got all of these amateurs that are suddenly becoming stars, whether it's on TikTok or YouTube or whatever it is the platform is. There were no experts because there was no platform. So all of a sudden, all of these people now have an expertise in something that didn't exist 5 minutes ago. Now, what about other people that are experts and considered experts by others? How much should we trust their opinions? How definite are we that they will lead us to the right place just because they've spent a lot of time on a subject? Well, I don't think the answer is as clear cut as you think. And also, we are in the process of ruining our society because we deeply misunderstand the value of expertise, the value of science, and what science is. And we totally don't understand the concept of authoritative sources, which is something that's been recently introduced, but we really need to talk about. Let's start with what triggered my thinking on this. There's a guy maybe you've heard of. His name is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. If his name sounds familiar to you, yes, he is from the Kennedy family, and he is Robert Kennedy's son. He's a very intelligent guy. I've seen him interviewed. He has some sort of throat disease or problem, and so he sounds very raspy and he sounds weird. But don't take anything away from him. He's a smart guy. Now, he also happens to be a smart guy who I think is probably wrong about vaccines. You know, there's this oversimplification that's going on where people have tried to position him as an anti-vaxxer. He's not an anti-vaxxer. He's a nuanced thinker. And his research happened to lead him to say that some vaccines aren't as good as others, and some we should reconsider giving to people. Now, I haven't checked all his research, to be honest with you. He seems to be a guy who is legitimate, not insane in any way that I could detect. But he was recently booted off of Instagram for spreading misinformation. Because in his view, he thinks that we should be questioning vaccines, and there are powers that be that don't think vaccine should be questioned. Now, I'm a pro-vaccine guy. In fact, I've been trying to get on the vaccine list endlessly for the last, 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I can't seem to get it. I want to restart my life all over again. I'm running away. I'm going to some other country, starting all over as a sovereign, COVID-proof individual. Anyway, my point is there are people who sometimes disagree with official narratives. That does not mean they're wrong because they're not experts. Case in point, almost, 2 weeks later or something, there was a bunch of stories in Business Week and in Bloomberg about a guy named Zhonggu who lives with his parents. He's a 27-year-old, and he used AI and data analytics to make some very accurate COVID predictions. Now, he's also not an expert. He's not an epidemiologist, which I still don't know exactly if I'm pronouncing properly or exactly the definition. But apparently that is someone who studies the spread of diseases. He is not that. He is a data guy, and he is a computer guy, and he is a nerd, and he's a guy who lives with his parents. And yet, miraculously, somehow, he came up with some better thoughts than other people did who are in that field. So he just happened to get it right. And he gets all of these fawning articles, and he deserves them. That's great. I have nothing against that. But the point I'm trying to make is not who's right and who's wrong, but in the necessity to question things. And sometimes the people doing the questioning are outsiders. They're not people who are experts or have been anointed experts and are overly confident in their answers, because sometimes those answers are wrong. And that is how science works. Just think about how many times Fauci has been wrong. First, he went on TV to say, hey, we don't need masks. Only people who work in intensive care units, no masks. We don't need them. It's crazy for you to wear them. Then he came out for masks later. Same thing happened with our assumptions of spread on surfaces. Everyone's like, oh my God, we better disinfect everything. People were getting poisoning from all the cleaning solutions. More people died from the cleaning solutions than died from the actual COVID that supposedly spread through all of these items they were wiping down. And then also the origins of the disease. We were wrong about that. Now, every credible expert is saying, yes, it came from Wuhan, and yes, it probably came from the lab in Wuhan. So all of those people who tried to shut others down, oh, you can't say that, they were wrong. They were wrong not once, not twice, not 3 times. I only have 3 examples, but there have been countless times they've been wrong. And they cannot be the only source of information. People have the ability to question things. There are people who are hobbyists who are way better at certain things than people who are being paid to do things. Think about just podcasting. You know, we happen to be doing one now. So podcasting, there are tons of celebrities that have been hired to do podcasts by professional podcasting companies. They have producers. They have all of these, resources to tap into. And guess what? They suck. They're unlistenable. You're going to go listen to Amy Schumer's podcast? I dare you. First of all, it probably doesn't even exist anymore. But that's the thing. It's like a bunch of experts said, oh, we're gonna throw a team behind Amy and she's going to talk for 3 hours or whatever it is. No, you're not going to be able to do that because it's a skill and it's something you have to cultivate. So people who cultivate these things sometimes do it in private and not through official channels. And there are tons of people like that who actually are able to give us better answers and better ideas than the sanctioned experts. And there's this concept that Twitter and I think Facebook and the other networks have been going with, this concept of authoritative sources, as if there are anointed authorities and these are the only people who are allowed to speak. So those were the WHO, the World Health Organization, it was the CDC, it was Fauci, it was all these people, and they were wrong. Countless times, countless examples, and not just COVID. I'm just using COVID because it happens to be a convenient example. But there are so many times. Think about diets and dietary restrictions and nutrition. How many times those things were wrong? People are like, oh, don't eat eggs because eggs have cholesterol and that will raise your blood cholesterol. Now we have science that tells us that's completely untrue. Egg is like the perfect food. You can eat a bunch of them all day. Don't listen to me. Go read the latest research. But the idea is that it's probably one of the best foods you could eat. So all of these things that we thought were good, low fat was stupid. Turns out it's sugar, but the sugar industry has been buying people off to tell people that it's fat. It's the most insane thing. And we can't always go with experts and then silence all of the other people. So this concept of authoritative sources is not only bizarre, it's insane. And it's being used as a weapon to silence people and people who should not likely be silenced. And you know what? There are bad people out there who are going to give misinformation, but ultimately we're going to get misinformation from a lot of places. So we have to get good at critical thinking and picking out what's good and what isn't. And yeah, I would say on balance, authoritative sources or people in authority probably will give you more correct answers than incorrect answers. But I say that with a lot of hesitation. It might be 51-49. It's close. So everyone has agendas. And a lot of times, hobbyists have the fewest agendas. People getting paid, especially ones in politics, who are getting paid through all kinds of sources that we don't even know about. You know how many corporations fund political campaigns? So we don't know where people's loyalties lie. So sometimes someone who's willing to dedicate their own spare time with nothing to gain to research a subject deeply, that person's expertise matters even if they're wrong. Even if they're wrong, because that's how science works. Science is not about having answers. It's about always and constantly challenging the answers that we have and coming up with better ones. That is science. And we are in severe violation of scientific principle with the ideas of banning people and this concept of authoritative sources, which is bullshit. It's so funny. There's a publication called The Dissenter, and they tweeted, I have excluded people whose ideas are disputed by the bulk of the scientific community from my list of potential guests. The dissenter does not like dissent. If you were to say, I have excluded people whose ideas are disputed by the bulk of the scientific community, and you said that in the year 1612, Copernicus is the one who said the earth revolves around the sun. All of the experts of the day thought it was the other way around, that the sun revolves around the earth. Today, that seems obvious to everyone except the flat earthers, to whom I think very little is obvious. I'm not sure how they eat. I'm not sure how flat earthers feed themselves and how they're still alive. I would think that at some point they would just poison themselves because they're trying to cook their dog or their hand. I have no idea. Anyway, the idea that you can't have heterodoxical thinkers. Oh my God, I got to look up a lot of words to make sure I'm using them correctly. There are a lot of thinkers that are not going with consensus. That does not mean they're wrong. Sometimes even when they're wrong, they're worth hearing out because they will bring up valid critiques that we should consider. So I put together this handy dandy chart. And if you're listening on the audio podcast, I'll explain what the axes are. So on the bottom, it's the discipline. Is what we're talking about, the subject that we're talking about, is it intra-discipline within your discipline, or is it cross-discipline? And is the problem known or new? So if the problem is known, and we're talking about a specific discipline, like how do we do genetic testing on a pig and how do we extract the DNA and all that stuff, that is very much biotech. So if you're an expert in biotech, you're going to know how to do that. And your explanation is very valid and should probably be taken as truth. Then you start moving on to places where things are a little bit different. Even if you're still within the discipline, there are things in biotech we have not yet solved, like how do you clone something, right? So that's a new problem and maybe one we shouldn't be solving because we might recreate Hitler or something stupid. But if you have a new problem, then that person who's the same expert is on shakier ground. And I've worked with a lot of great experts in financial services and technology and consumer products and all these other things. But when it comes to launching new products, when it comes to innovating, they're not experts anymore. Or not all of them. They might have ideas, they might have insights to bring in terms of things that have worked in the past. They have history, all things that are valid inputs. But they are not necessarily great creators of outputs anymore because the problem is new. Then let's move over and talk about, well, what if the problem is known, but it also crosses many disciplines, right? So COVID, since we're using that as an example, if we were to say, hey, let's listen to the scientists, let's listen to the health professionals, sounds like a good idea. But that's not the only effect of COVID and lockdowns and all of these other things. There are people who are losing businesses. There are people who are losing lives because they're depressed. There are kids who are not getting educations. There are all kinds of people who are suffering, who are despondent, who are lonely, who are depressed. The consequences of the pandemic and the lockdowns and the quarantines and all this stuff are way bigger than just the health profession. So when we say listen to the experts, medical experts are not the only experts. So when you ask a medical expert, they have a very specific lens on the world and they will give you their answer. They will tell you how to mitigate risk 100% of not getting the disease. You will lay there in a box forever and then you will not have COVID. But you have to take other considerations, self-worth, living a life, kids losing a year or 2 years of education. All of these things have to be weighed as well as the health risks. So now you have to bring in other experts. So you're no longer talking about an intra-discipline problem, you're talking about a cross-discipline problem. And that will lead you to some very different answers than the ones you thought you would get with just those medical experts. And that would be the wrong way to frame that problem. And then finally, what if both the problem is new and it crosses disciplines? You are now floating in the ocean. Now, experts can help you in some ways. They can give you useful information, but it's not just one type of expert. It's people from all different fields and all different ways of thinking and all different geographies and all different experiences. You need them. You need to pull them in to get close to the right answer. There's still no guarantee you're going to get the right answer or not in time to solve the problem. But at the very least, you have to recognize that there are people outside of this world because there is no contained world anymore. So, we talked about that guy who, did the data analysis. He didn't live in the science world. He's not an epidemiologist. This is a guy who looks at it from a data perspective. So he saw the COVID projections and the risk of COVID as something to solve using his data set. And his data set relies on other data sets that are in the medical field. And so that crosses at least two fields, but there are problems that cross 2, 3, or 4 fields, like getting to Mars. Elon Musk is going to need all kinds of people. He's going to need physicists. He's going to need biologists. He's going to need chemists. He's going to need rocket engineers. There's all kinds of problems that are generated by trying to live on another planet, besides the fact that everyone who goes there will die immediately and forever. We should be saving Earth. Elon, point the rockets to Earth. Let's fix the stuff here. He's like, screw it. I give up. I'm going to Mars. He's not going, in all fairness. He's going to send a bunch of idiots who are going to die. So we have to recognize that expertise deteriorates. It deteriorates as you move away from a particular discipline and as you move away from known problems to unknown ones. And we have to keep that in mind. And that's why it's so important to let the light in, let other people's ideas in. And this is another post. This is Daniel Kahneman, really smart guy. He said that 3 conditions must be met to trust expert intuition. First, environmental regularity, so common patterns. Second is lots of practice. And third is immediate feedback. If those conditions do not develop, I don't think we can trust people who say they're experts. I don't think we could trust people who say they're experts regardless, because you need to contextualize things a little bit deeper now. The problems are too great. The problems are now global. The number of people involved is way more complex. The problems we deal with now are not the same problems we had in a village where a donkey ran away or some animal is going to attack you. Those are relatively defined problems. The ones we have now are not so well defined. So yes, I think what he said is relevant, but I think it lives primarily in that first box of known problems and interdisciplinary challenges. We also have to be very careful because there is a monopoly of sorts of the professional class that rules over social networks, over government, and over a lot of these institutions that we have. A lot of times they're perfectly competent, they're good people, they mean well. What the professional class sometimes lacks is empathy. And what they also lack is the ability to recognize when something is outside of their reach, or sometimes even what questions to ask. You have to know when you don't know. And a lot of people are very uncomfortable with that idea. First of all, not knowing, and secondly, admitting to others that they don't know. And until we get comfortable with that, until the people who run TV networks, the people who run social networks, the people who work in government and in corporate, until they're able to do that, until they're able to acknowledge those things when they don't know, and some do it very well, but it's not the norm. Until they do, It's really up to us to let in more voices. And unfortunately, it's more work because there was a time when life was simpler. There were fewer channels, there were fewer complexities, and you could pretty much trust what's coming in enough to live your life. Now, I would say not. But again, I would err on the side of letting more in and then just filtering. And that's the job that we've been assigned, whether we like it or not. We are filters, for better or worse. That's it for this episode. Thanks for joining. Don't forget, sign up to get the newsletter, the McFuture.com/newsletter, and subscribe to the show on all your favorite platforms. Review it on iTunes. Tell others. And most important, if you really feel strongly, if this bond is real, if this is what I think it is, go to patreon.com/McFuture and get tons of exclusives. You'll have so many exclusives, you'll think we're best friends. You'll practically be sleeping in my bed. There's not a lot of room in there, but it's going to feel good. It's going to feel really fulfilling. Anyway, see you next time on the McFuture.